Let's start with a quick round of introductions. Let's start with you, Jesse. Who are you and where are you based?
Hi, yeah. So I'm Jesse Gumm. I'm out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the United States. I discovered Erlang in 2009 from the Hacker News. There was a day in Hacker News where Paul Graham told everybody, like, stop talking about fluff and let's talk about stuff like the innards of Erlang, and the whole front page became Erlang stuff. And I thought, that's interesting. And so I started diving into it and thought it was fascinating. I got involved with the Nitrogen framework at about the same time because I was largely a web developer focusing on my own little projects. And then in 2011, Rusty stepped down from the project and I took it over. And I've been running Nitrogen, the Nitrogen web framework ever since. Aside from that, I run the QDate date and time zone management library, which has saved me just countless times. And beyond that, I'm a founder. So I founded a project called Bracketpal, or a product called Bracketpal, called Bracketpal, that is a beach and league, or a beach volleyball league and tournament management system. And then beyond that, we're recently just published, myself and Lloyd Prentice recently published a book about Nitrogen called Build It with Nitrogen, the fast off the block Erlang web framework. That's pretty much my background.
Brilliant. Hope it's not too early in the morning for you.
It's not too bad. It's earlier than usual, but
Yes.
I've nailed at least a half a monster so far. So I'll be real jazzed by the end of this for sure.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Niclas, over to you. Where are you based and who are you?
Yeah, all right. So my name is Niclas Axelsson. I'm based in the western part of Sweden, in a very small town called Årjäng, close to the Norwegian border. I've been doing Erlang development for quite some time now. Got introduced at the university where we actually got our hands on one of the first version of Nitrogen, and been developing Erlang since then. Then a couple of years ago, me and Daniel was talking a little bit about web development in general, and we said that there's quite some space left in the Erlang ecosystem for a web framework. And in the past, we had used Chicago Boss, which was a great tool, but unfortunately, it was a little bit hard to build releases on and some other things with it. So we decided to start our own framework, trying to address all the shortcomings from the Chicago Boss, making basically an MVC kind of framework. So the MVC was the first thing we wanted to do, but unfortunately there wasn't a good way of handling generic models in Erlang. So we dropped that, focusing only on the view controller kind of aspects in the framework. So we have been developing it for 2 years now, and we are getting speed on it. So hopefully we will release the first version of it, or version 1.0, I would say, very, very soon. So, yeah.
Brilliant. And Daniel, what about you? Where are you based? And who are you?
Yeah, so Daniel, I'm based in Uppsala. I kind of first got in contact with Erlang through Uppsala University, where we did a e-commerce system for Klarna, like a project with Nitrogen and React back in the days. I think React was at like version 0.2 when we started with it, and it hadn't like delete. So so they needed to speed things up when we kind of start asking questions. So it was really good to get in touch with the Bash team and start the way to Erlang. And from that, I've been to a couple of companies where I've done much of the kind of web server or like REST API and API construction of servers, where we've used different web servers in Erlang and frameworks like Chicago Boss or Mistletoe. We had like MockWeb and Web Machine like in the past. And today, I would say most of the things are built on Cowboy. So, and from that kind of ideas came also to do Nova. So.
Okay, yeah, come in contact with Erlang at Uppsala University. It sounds familiar.
Yeah.
a few years apart, but yeah, it's there. I think quite a few I'm seeing in the audience are raising their hands as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is Nova?
Yeah, I can share some slide here, and we can have it. Niclas kind of started with some of the things about what is Nova. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, great. So what is Nova? We kind of started it as a web framework that we wanted to enter the space where kind of Chicago Boss left. So today it is more like a view controller where, so you can have the views in a DTL Django template language, and you write your kind of controller in Erlang, and it kind of helps you to put it along. You can also use it as kind of pure API server also if you don't want to have views. It can handle some session handling, and one thing that we put much energy into is that we have like a pipeline plugin system, and that is for each request that hits the server, you can have like things that happens before your controller and things that happens after your controller. So in this way, you can add like correlation ID in the beginning, or you can have metrics taken time from when the request entered the system and how long it take when it went out. And so you can have these kind of things. We did a kind of design decision early to build it on Cowboy, because we have used Cowboy for so many years before this, and it is a stable and good web server. So some of the background that me and Niclas had worked with lot of both web servers and frameworks, and some of the things that we use is like Erlang Web, Nitrogen, Chicago Boss, and Sotonic. And the one that we kind of liked was Chicago Boss, but Chicago Boss didn't really have good release handling, and some of these kind of things did a lot of things in the background, and didn't really do things like in the OTP process. So that is one of the things that we wanted with Nova also, is that it should be close to like Erlang OTP and how it is released, and try to be like minimized and handling the core functionality. And then we try to build things on top of Nova. So that is kind of the background. We did a talk last year about Nova, if you want to know more deeply what it is. And we have some small things that are small. We are kind of rewriting things for Nova right now, and hopefully release 1.0 soon. We will talk about this later today also. So we have done some new routing, and also looking to be more Beam friendly. And hopefully we will release a new homepage with a little bit more content. So this is kind of the basic things of Nova.
Thanks. And Jesse, what is Nitrogen?
Sure. So the elevator pitch of Nitrogen is it is a Erlang web framework for building highly dynamic applications in native Erlang. What that really translates to is building your web applications using pretty much exclusively Erlang. Very few applications, or it's not necessary to write your Nitrogen applications using a lot of HTML and JavaScript. I'll kind of touch back on that later, but throughout that process, there's usually a persistent WebSocket connection active between the client and the server that handles things like the postbacks and updating page elements and changing things and moving things and doing the usual interactive stuff a website has to do. There's also all that stuff functions through the postback system, which the postback system operates kind of like a like an OTP gen server, where there is a handler function or an event function that handles those postbacks and pattern matches against them to determine what to do with that specific message. A little deeper into the stack, Nitrogen is ultimately backend agnostic, so you can use just about any Erlang web server. It's all done through the Simple Bridge project, and the Simple Bridge project has a hijacking capability built into it, where it can hijack the socket and add WebSocket support to a non-WebSocket supporting web server. So if you really want to run your application with inets, Simple Bridge can take over and manage the WebSockets for you, even if you are running inets. It can function without WebSockets. There's a handful of folks that are just like, we don't want to deal with WebSockets, and then the system falls back naturally to native AJAX requests. And then further, it's Nitrogen, just like Nova, Nitrogen does not have a database component to it at all. It is ultimately database agnostic. That's not to say, obviously, you can't run a web application without a database. So there are plenty of adapters out there to fall into, but that's kind of out of the purview of Nitrogen for interfacing with the database. It's one of the things Nitrogen has is it's very customizable. It's got a series of like 9 or 10 different customizable handlers that you can write handler modules that deal with things like routing and how you want to deal with post and get requests, session management. So if you want to plug in Amnesia or Redis or something else instead of the native session management, how you want to deal with crashes. You want to call it out to a log, you want to use a custom logger system like Splunk or something. And then you can roll all those into, you can roll all of that stuff into a Nitrogen plugin. And then I didn't even mention you can add your own like Erlang or Nitrogen elements, actions, all that stuff, all those abstractions that are those Erlang terms, all those Erlang terms that you would create, the Erlang records that turn into Nitrogen, that ultimately turn into HTML or JavaScript. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. That's kind of the broad strokes. I don't know if I went a little too deep in the weeds there, but
that sounds great. And actually, we have the first questions from the audience. If anyone has questions, please post them in the app. But it's actually a question I was going to ask myself, but I'll pass over to Max Nordlund. Over to you, Max.
Yes. So I've been reading a bit on the website for Nitrogen, and it sounds a lot like Phoenix Live View. The whole write your stuff, have a persistent process, event handling, etc. How does it compare to Phoenix Live View?
That's a good question. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Continue.
Phoenix, but like both of the frameworks, like how do you compare to Phoenix, the web framework in Elixir? But more specifically for Nitrogen, how do you compare to Live View, which also has the do everything in Elixir or do everything in Erlang?
I honestly, it might be embarrassing, but I don't have a good answer to that. I'm very deep in the weeds myself. So I've written almost exclusively in Erlang and Nitrogen for 12 years. And I haven't I haven't dove into the Phoenix Live View system. I know of its presence. I know that it is very similar to Nitrogen in its goal. And obviously I know that Elixir has a lot of momentum with it, and Phoenix and Live View along with it. But as far as being able to put out an actual comparison, I actually can't. My official position on this has always kind of been like, use what feels right to you. And Nitrogen has always felt right to me for like, basically since I stumbled upon it all those years back, it just felt like this is kind of the way I want to do things. And that's when I ran with it. And then seeing Live View come to light was kind of like, that looks like that was kind of inspired by stuff I've been doing for years. So that's kind of where I stand officially on that. I know Daniel and Niclas had some thoughts on that as well. I don't know if they wanted to.
Not really. I kind of asked Bruce the same question yesterday, but the other way around, like what's the difference between nitrogen and LiveView, and they hadn't used nitrogen, so they couldn't answer it. So yeah, but my feeling is kind of also like if we compare like nitrogen and LiveView, is that LiveView has more functionality from Phoenix, like because it's used the Phoenix ecosystem in a closer way. You can use it in a different way. That is just my feeling of it.
Okay, thanks for that. And I guess very much, yeah. If your project's written in Erlang, then you're probably more comfortable in Erlang, and if it's written in Elixir, you're more comfortable in Elixir. And I think is probably why we see developers pick one versus the other. So, to Jesse, what about the nitrogen book?
Sure. So yeah, so our nitrogen book, we just released it in December this year. It's almost 600 pages. It's pretty big here. So it's a pretty big book. But it was written by myself and Lloyd Prentice. His background is that he has been an entrepreneur for many years. He's got a technical background. He likes to wax philosophic about Forth, the language. And he is a published fiction author. And having that angle helped to kind of steer the direction of the book in a way that it makes it an entertaining technical book, just because he's he knows how to angle. I'm pretty dry, like writing technical documentation is not exactly the most entertaining thing. So Lloyd was able to kind of spice that up and make it a little bit more a little bit more approachable. And we cover all the usual topics, like building, working with the elements and handling the usual CRUD type applications and doing some live interaction stuff. But we've also added stuff like interfacing with, like how to interface with databases, how to interface with external APIs, how to build your own custom elements and plugins, and even one of the things that I've started getting into deep is using behaviors to model pages and like actually create like behaviors as kind of like mini frameworks within the framework, as well as covering some broader topics like security, OTP, and we even have an appendix to help get you started with Git if you're not familiar with Git. And so it's pretty good, I think.
Cool.
Yeah, we'll put the link somewhere in here, but
so
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was looking for it. Yeah, I'll post it in the chat right now, so you can all go in and order it. Jesse, why don't you go ahead and post a link in the chat in the WoW app? So you need to start that from there. So whilst you're doing that, let me ask a question, well, to everyone, but where would you use your frameworks, or why would someone want to build an application using your frameworks? So let's start with Nova, whilst Jesse posts a link to the book.
Yeah. Daniel, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was mentioned before is kind of what the Nova also does is that it helps you build an easy application on Cowboy, and also it gives you a solid way to maintain your application and release it. So that is kind of the things that we have aimed for Nova, is that it should be easy to use, easy to just start writing APIs, and you don't really need to handle that much of the boiler code that you needed to handle before with Cowboy. And you also get OTP's kind of release handling with rebar free. So yeah. Niclas, did I miss something?
No, I don't think so. Mention the big points at least.
Great. So, and what about nitrogen?
Yeah, so the most common thing I hear from nitrogen users is I'm a back-end developer, and I don't want to deal with writing JavaScript, which is, of course, the hook all along. So a lot of folks, you end up using it for building dashboards that interact with their existing Erlang applications that are whatever, and they just don't want to deal with learning the intricacies of building modern front-end applications. Obviously, that's not its own thing. It could certainly be used for building general purpose applications. So, like the Bracketpel, my main business, my main product is a general purpose system. But as an example of just the trade-off of how much HTML, JavaScript, and all that, I just did a line count yesterday because I was curious, kind of curious how this grows. So my Bracketpel product is currently sitting at about 85,000 lines of Erlang code and about 300 lines of JavaScript and just under 500 lines of handwritten HTML. So the usual draw in that is just the very common draw is I'm a back-end developer. I don't want to deal with learning front-end technologies. I just want something that works, and that's inevitably what I end up hearing about. And that's even kind of myself. I have a background, prior to Erlang, I was doing a lot of PHP and did ASP back in the early 2000s and all that stuff. And it just dropping all that and just jumping into Erlang felt right. I don't know.
It's quite a mind shift.
Yeah.
So I think we've got a question, and I'm trying to slot in the questions as and when they see fit instead of keeping them all towards the end. But Timofey, over to you.
Yeah.
Thank you for being with us.
So previously I worked as a Django developer, and like the way they work there is that you have request handlers. The request comes in, you send the response back. So it was very easy to grasp and understand how does Nitrogen compare to this way? Like what are the main abstractions in it to work with this all?
I feel like probably the biggest barrier to adoption most folks would encounter is, of course, or at least most commonly cited objection is Erlang as a language. I personally really like it, but as far as like handling requests and all that, it's all pretty trivial. The postback system works very well. You can wrap up any Erlang terms you want into a postback and have that sent off to the server. Then the server can pull out variables from the page or, at that point from anywhere else. But at least from what you've described, I can't see a whole lot of barriers there. There are, if you are familiar with Django, then of course you can always rope in the Django template library in Erlang, and there are a handful of folks you can rope that right in and either build a custom template element that calls out to the DTL files or integrate it some other way. But it's yeah. How does that answer your question, or am I missing a detail?
No, I guess I will have to look into Nitrogen a bit more, like try the tutorial and see for myself.
Sure. Yeah. Give her a go. Thanks.
So obviously, it's great to have a framework. It's much and to build a framework, it's much harder, to get adoption and get others to start using it. What are some of the interesting projects which you're aware of, which have been built with your frameworks, either by you or by others, which obviously you're allowed to share?
Yeah, we used Nova as a part of Sark when it was so we built a chat server as a kind of start for both Sark and customers later for Sark. So using WebSocket, kind of the same functionality that Phoenix has with the Phoenix channels kind of thing. And we also have had companies where it used as a backend system for like intercom system for doors when you're outside your resident and want to call someone and they open the door kind of functionality. So that is some of the projects I worked on with Nova. I know Niclas had done some for like companies using like customs between Norway and Sweden, if I remember it right. Yeah, so it's not used that much all over the place yet, but some companies has it.
It's getting there, yeah.
Yeah.
Jesse, what about nitrogen?
Sure. So definitely one of the coolest projects that I was involved with was we built a prototype for a WebRTC based telemedicine system for a group out of Uganda who was trying to make they're basically trying to make telemedicine more accessible to folks who live out in the villages where internet, everybody doesn't have a tablet or a laptop in their house, and they want to have access to a doctor that might at nearest be 100 miles away, and they don't have a practical way of getting there. So that was a fun project to work on. Ultimately, it didn't go anywhere, but it was fun to build a prototype for that. Then, of course, I've already mentioned Brackapal, the league and tournament management system. That one's pretty neat. Just being able to rope in some of the Erlang functionality, or just the Erlang benefits of like live scoring and things changing constantly and dynamically, and it's great. In terms of folks who aren't me writing stuff, of course there's I've heard of it used for stuff like university admissions management. One of the projects that stuck with me over the years that I always thought was really neat was before Google Home and Alexa were almost ubiquitous, was someone used nitrogen with a Raspberry Pi to build a home like electronics controlling system. So they were turning their lights on and off and controlling their heat and all that stuff through a Raspberry Pi with nitrogen, which I always thought was kind of a fun little side project. And then probably most recently, I think the most recent project that I had heard of was someone who is using it to build a Dungeons and Dragons character management system, which is just is fun. It's just a fun topic. And I had a look at the product and it looks great. I don't know if they're going to try to go. I don't know if they're going to try to go broad with it and like deploy it as a system, or if it's just going to be used for their own purposes. But it's a fun little project. Yeah, so those are kind of the coolest ones that I can think of.
Brilliant. And what is new in each of your projects? Obviously, a sign of life is new features, new ideas, new concepts. What have you just both recently added in both Nova and Nitrogen? Let's start with Nova first.
Yeah, Daniel, should I?
One of the things that we kind of changed is making Nova more Beam friendly. We kind of got the request from the LFE community if it was possible to write a web app in LFE and using Nova as kind of the framework. So we did get it working, but it kind of needed a lot of extra work to get it work. So what we try to aim now is to make it more Beam friendly. So it should be able to use kind of any language that runs on the Beam. So that is kind of what we aim for now. Niclas, do you want to take for the routing part?
Yeah, sure. We also, before now, we have relied on the routing that is inside of Cowboy. And that has been working quite well for us. The only problem is that we had to, in order to get routing based on methods, for example, we needed to have an intermediate step between the request coming in and where it went out to the final module. So what we have done now is to build a prefix tree based routing mechanism. So the cool thing with that is that it's built basically a radix tree. based on your routes. This means that we can actually detect problems with your routing, sort of if you have duplicate path, or if you have a non-deterministic route, for example, where you have a binding that interferes with another path. So that's what we're building now, which will enables us to remove the routing or to rely on the routing in Cowboy directly. So we will be more integrated toward the low levels of Cowboy. So this is quite exciting.
Great. What about you, Jesse?
Sure. So the latest release of Nitrogen came back in November or December this year. The most recent big functionality that went into it, beyond the usual, like more elements and more actions and more stuff, has been the implementation of a proper cache handler, which means that now it has built-in native caching. But again, of course, you can always rewrite your cache handler to, again, call out to like Redis or Amnesia or whatever you want. And then one of the more interesting ones that Lloyd had been pushing for years, and I finally got the time to do it, was to build Pandoc integration. So Pandoc is super neat in its capacity to convert, basically kind of anything to anything. It's very broadly defined, but the practical side of it for me was that it allowed me to rewrite or rather regenerate the documentation from what it was originally written in, which was Emacs org mode, and convert it into Markdown, and then directly pull that into the main website itself, so that it's integrated as basically as a template file, rather than what it previously was, which is a bunch of had to be a bunch of static generated HTML using a bunch of org mode scripts. But I see a lot of interesting capacity with that, because then you could create a Markdown file and throw in a couple of variables and a couple of callouts, have that run through the Pandoc template system, and then produce a PDF. Like, that kind of stuff becomes very practical when you're trying to generate stuff on the fly, and specifically generating PDFs is pretty useful in a business application. I run into stuff like that all the time. So those are kind of the two newest functionalities that were added into Nitrogen.
Okay, great. So we've got 5 minutes left. Let's start wrapping up by understanding what the roadmap is for each of your projects. So Jesse, let's continue with you. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, the biggest part of the roadmap that needs to be addressed is the proper conversion to Rebar 3. You can run Nitrogen with Rebar 3, but out of the gates, Nitrogen still is one of the few projects left that's still on Rebar 2. So I'm actively working on that. And then the Comet system is ultimately going to have to get an update as well, because there's just a couple of warts in there. That's one of the biggest tangled messes of naked bangs and calls to everything. It just gets a little out of control. And then introducing, I mentioned previously, this behavior system for generating pages using Erlang behaviors. That I feel is something that I want to start introducing as more proper first-class features, because I think that's a very, very neat pattern for very quickly building applications.
Sounds great. Niclas, Daniel, what about you guys?
Yes, for us it would probably be continue to integrate to be like pure, like proper middleware in Cowboy. Also continue with the new routing system that we have started. And then we have that we know that we're lacking, and that is tooling and like templates and things around that. It's easier to use Nova or create new pages or like new controllers and get things running. So that is kind of the roadmap. So hopefully we'll get it in place and try to do a 1.0 release quite soon, so we feels it more stable. So yeah.
Great. Okay. And I think, Codebeam, both the virtual as well as the physical events, and prior to that, the Erlang User Conference and the Erlang Factories have always been about bringing together people, getting people to know each other, and cooperation. I believe you didn't know each other prior to CodeBeam. Is that right?
Me and Jesse kind of started to mail each other for like half a year ago.
Yeah.
Because I had a kind of idea that I wanted to have something like live view for Nova, and I wanted to see if it was possible to take Nitrogen Core and see if how we could do it. But it kind of, I had kind of much to do, and it kind of didn't go so well in that with time. But looking forward, you've now had that opportunity to come in, do a joint session, and I'm sure there've been a lot of discussions in the run up to these joint sessions. I mean, what are the talks of cooperation between your two projects? How are you looking? What are you looking at doing and moving forward? It looks like there are a lot of synergy effects in what you're both doing. Yeah, I mean, I would say that what we kind of discussed and bounced around is try to do a live view, but for Nova and using Nitrogen. The big question is kind of like, what do we need to cut in Nitrogen to get it working? But I mean, I have always liked Nitrogen, so I didn't want to like redo the wheel and everything, because Nitrogen is a good tool. But I wanted it to work with Nova and use the strengths and features that Nova has. So me, Jess, and Niclas had a really good session earlier this week where we kind of bounced ideas. So
brilliant. Well, we look forward to a presentation, I think, at in person at CodeBeam Europe next year. Right, Jesse, Daniel, Niclas, thank you so much for your time and for being here with us today. This was great. And for everyone else, we've posted the link to the book in the chat, so you can find it there. Great.
Thanks, Francesco.
Thank you.
Pleasure as always.
Thanks everyone for
watching.
watching.